and it was talking about different email signatures. Like, if you can replace your email signature, and they said replace your email signature with a line from an OPM song. And it has to be your email signature for all of your emails from now on, diba? So I was asking friends, like, what would your email signature from an OPM song be? So, di ba, parang hinahanap-hanap kita, Joe. Parang ganun, di ba? Parang you make every email romantic. Then my brother joked, he goes, his email signature would be, tama na yan, inuman na, Josh. Parang ganun. So, different jokes like that. And then, another friend of mine on Facebook used the same meme and said, change a line to a hymn. Your email signature has to be a line from a hymn. And what would your email signature be? What would you want to represent you in every email you send? And I just love that thread. I'll share it in the Telegram group. It was so encouraging, all these classic lines. And the one I chose was that line from Great is Thy Faithfulness. Strength for today, bright hope for tomorrow, Job. Like, I was just thinking, like, imagine in every exchange, like, that's what you come away with, that God gives us strength for today and to endure whatever difficulty, and it is difficult, that's why we need strength. Strength for today, but also hope for tomorrow. That's what we're talking about in our series. We're in the third week, Faith in the Night. We're saying suffering is a universal human experience. Everyone has to deal with it, to wrestle with it. In fact, one could say we can categorize different human cultures based on their approach to this question. Why do humans suffer? Is it part of your karma? Is it because of your devotedness to the fleshly nature of the world? Is it dualism? Light and dark are forever fighting. Is it because the gods are mad and they're fighting each other? And we're saying that in the Christian perspective, God gives us unique resources for dealing with suffering, for dealing with pain. In the first week, we talked about God's promise. His promise is that suffering is wrong, and while He allows it for a time, He will restore it with such a glory to the point that it will pale in comparison to what we're enduring in the present. Last week we talked about God listens. He doesn't just expect us to believe in that afterlife and in that glory, but even in the present, we can complain. We can come to Him and pour out our hearts, and He wants to listen to it. In fact, He even intercedes with us, the Spirit Himself. If we're groaning and saying, napakahirap naman ang buhay na to, if we're doing that, the Holy Spirit Himself inside of us is groaning with us, taking our prayers, perfecting them, and taking them up to the Father to hear. And today we talk about another resource that God gives to us, and that is His sovereignty. God's sovereignty. It's a beautiful concept in Scripture, but a very difficult one to wrestle with. In fact, one way Bible teachers talk about this is if you hear the concept of God's sovereignty and don't have a problem with it, don't have any questions about it, we might not be understanding it that well. But if you hear it and it makes you go, wait a minute, if that's true, then congratulations, you are understanding it, the reality of it. But while it's difficult and challenging, it is also beautiful and encouraging and life-giving. And it gives us truths about God that really, honestly, nowhere else in the world will you find this explanation of suffering. Everywhere else is a little too simplistic or too reductionist. You have to remove an essential part of the human experience and say, okay, it's only like this. It's only because the gods are mad. It's only because you're devoted to the fleshly world. You really shouldn't be devoted to it. This wrestling, this God's sovereignty, helps us see it in its complexity. And we won't comprehend it and we won't be able to capture it, but we will have the assurance that there is someone who is in charge of it. We'll be looking today in the book of Job, and I have the challenge of covering 42 chapters. We're not going to do the whole thing, obviously, or not every part. But the book of Job is part of the wisdom literature in the Bible, the genres of wisdom. You've got the classic one, Proverbs, where Proverbs is, we're familiar with Proverbs, and the format of Proverbs is very consistent. Blessings for the wise and penalties for the foolish. Right? Oh, this person doesn't like correction, so he earns more pain and suffering. And this person receives correction, so they get blessings. And so you kind of have, when you read Proverbs, you kind of have this, okay, I kind of get how the world works. When you're wise, you get good stuff. When you save your money, you get good stuff. When you waste your money, you'll run out of money. Kind of makes sense. Yes, generally. But then the wisdom literature moves to Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes is kind of, yes, Proverbs is true, but not always. And there are times in the reflections in Ecclesiastes says, wait a minute, there are people who were wise who didn't get a lot of money. And there were people who were evil who seem to have had happy lives. How do we wrestle with that? And I love that the Bible covers that. Because that's human experience. How many times have you and I noticed that and observed that? And that's why I love we can talk to God about these things. Because we can be honest and be like, Lord, ba't ganito? Bakit yung kaibigan ko yung may sakit? Napakarami naman ng mga corrupt na dapat sila nalang may sakit. Bakit sila pa yung malulusog? Have you ever prayed those prayers? And maybe you've said, I can't pray that to God. Yes, you can. He wrote it in the book himself. It's a part of it. And it gets even stronger from Proverbs to Ecclesiastes to Job. Where Job is a whole book dedicated to exactly that scenario. A righteous person. It's not a question of whether or not Job is righteous. He is righteous. The narrator says in the beginning he's righteous. God himself says he's righteous. And all these disasters fall upon him. Why do bad things happen to good people? That's the thing that Job's wrestling with. And I like that because of that progression of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Job, where is that saying Proverbs is not true? Well, Proverbs in the sense that if you waste your money, you're going to run out. It's going to happen. If you don't receive correction, you're going to incur more penalties on yourself. But not always. It kind of reminds me, and I don't know if I'm going to lose you with this illustration. Baka okay pa kayo sa sovereignty. But it kind of reminds me of physics, where the current understanding of physics in the world today, and I find it fascinating. I'm not smart. I don't understand this, okay? I just watch it on TikTok and YouTube, okay? I'm not reading physics textbooks at home, okay? I'm just really fascinated by this thing. And here's what fascinates me. We can understand the middle of physics. But for very small and for very big things, we don't understand anymore. We can understand the middle. We can understand Newtonian physics. We can understand if you throw a ball at this velocity, it will grab, a car leaping from billion. All those problems you hated, all of that, we can understand those things. We can even understand momentum. We can even do greater things, like space travel and projecting how much fuel it will take to get to this. That is fascinating. But the very, very big things, like what is gravity? Or how suns behave, or the fact that the observable universe is disappearing. We don't see beyond that. Or the very, very small things, like atoms. Atoms are mostly empty space. Then why do I feel something? You know what I mean? If the distance, when you imagine an atom, you think of a nucleus. If the nucleus was here, where would the electron be? Based on the drawings, it would be somewhere here, right? No, it would be like in Fairview. Parang ganun, yung ganun kalayo, yung electron. So kung ganun siya kalayo, then if that's an atom, and it's mostly empty space, what am I touching right now? And people don't understand that. And what I'm saying is, we understand the middle part of physics, but those same laws, extend them. You get to a place where we're like, we have no idea what's going on. And that's what theoretical physicists are still trying to understand. And I think Proverbs is the same way. Proverbs is like Newtonian physics. Wow, that was so unhelpful. I just heard it myself. Okay, I've been so excited about this week. We can understand this part, but we get to a place where we're like, okay, God, I'm out of my depth. I don't get this anymore. Why do these things happen? And that's what the book of Job wrestles with, that intersection of human suffering and God's sovereignty. Let me read part of the first chapter of the book of Job just to set the stage. Then we'll get lessons about it after. Job 1, verse 1. In the land of Uz there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys. And he had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. People say that the intro of this book reads like a fairy tale, like a story. Apparently, that phrase in the land of Uz was an expression in the ancient Near East for malayo, in a far away land. This isn't a historical narrative like you're reading First Samuel or Kings or Judges. The intro pa lang, in the land of Uz, okay, a long time ago in a land far, far away. And even the description of Job, there are huge round numbers to describe his wealth. And even that summary statement, the greatest man among all the people of the East. It's like, you're just setting the stage. So this is the given. And verses 5, the later verses talk about how his children would be partying and he would offer sacrifices to God on behalf of his children. Verse 6, one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came from them. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied, have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well. Very well then, everything he has is in your power. But on the man himself do not lay a finger. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. For some of us who aren't familiar with this might be, what? Satan and God have meetings? Or do they have like a coffee date? Alam mo yun? Or like, and then just talking about people like pawns on a chessboard? And where is God's protection on Job? Where is God stopping Satan from doing these things? Very interesting thing. I think one thing we can point out, and we'll pull out more from this later. Let me just finish the chapter. But one thing we can point out is Satan presents himself to God. He is clearly God's underling. He is not equal with God. This is not like the common thing where Satan and God were playing golf, or Satan. It's not a peer thing that he can only act to the level that God allows him. And yet God allows him though. We can't evade that. We can't skip that. What happens next, verses 13 onwards, is disaster after disaster falls on Job's house. I'm just skipping it for the sake of time, but his oxen are taken away and stolen from him by raiders. His donkeys are taken away. His sheep and camels are taken away. And the worst disaster is while his children are partying in one of the brothers' houses, a wind comes and knocks down the entire house, and everyone inside is killed, including all of his kids. And these news hits Job in succession, one after the other. The verses say, while the first one is still speaking, the other one came. So it's rapid, these blows on him. Job's response, verse 20, at this Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. Verse 22, in all this Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. What is happening? And this is the story of the book of Job. And the chapter 1 already sets that stage. Chapter 2 ramps it up even more. The divine counsel happens again. The angels present themselves to God again. And Job tells Satan, oh, look what happened. You told me he's not righteous. You told me he would curse me if I let you harm him. And I let you harm him, and my servant has not cursed me. He is not only in it for the material possessions. He really does want to worship me. And Satan ups the ante. And he says, yeah, anyone will be fine with that. But if you take away his health, you make him suffer real pain, he will curse you to your face. And God again allows Satan and says, okay, you can't kill him though. You can't kill him, but sure, you can inflict pain on him. So Satan inflicts him with terrible boils. The verses literally say from the soles of his feet, sa talampakan niya, up to the top of his head. I can't imagine that. Parang may pigsa ka hanggang sa talampakan. Pati ba doon? Literally no inches left, and it's so painful that it says that Job's only relief, you know how sometimes you're in pain, that you inflict pain on another part of your body to get relief. His only relief is to get a broken piece of pottery and scrape himself with it. I guess that's distracting him from the pain in the other areas of his body. And yet he doesn't curse God again. Even his wife insists, his wife's telling him, why were you holding on to your integrity? Just curse God and die. And be done with it. And he won't. And just to jump to the end, no? So by the end of the book, chapter 42, Job doesn't curse God. And at the end of the book, God restores to him. He heals him completely. He brings him back all of his property, and he gets blessing again, including children again. But in the middle of the book is this long, and so the story of Job is really like two sections. There's the story time portion, chapter 1, 2, and 42. And in the middle is chapter 3 to 41, which is these long poems. They read like a play, like you're reading Shakespeare or something, of like some of the most eloquent expressions of pain. Where Job goes, I wish I was never born. That all this would happen to me. Everything good that I ever had in my life, I wish it never happened. Better to have never been alive. These beautiful expressions of pain. And I love the way that this commentator said, he said, you could imagine that the origin of the book of Job was like a story that was going around in their time. And it will be recounted over and over again. And the story was only chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 42. It was only, there was a guy, he was very great. Satan said he would curse God if he would be hurt, and he didn't curse God. And then Satan said he would be cursed, he would curse God if he was sick, and he didn't curse God. And you know what? God blessed him. You can combine those parts, remove the whole middle part, and it makes a great, I don't know, good night story, I guess, for kids of that time. And the commentator was saying, but we can imagine the author of Job took that story and found inspiration for the messy middle. That part where he didn't curse God. Did he just not curse God? No. It was a lot more complicated and nuanced than that, the way we are when we go through suffering and pain. So that's the thing with us, when we go through pain, we want to squash it down and simplify it because it's like, just get it over with. Ano ba talaga yung problema? And the book of Job expands the picture for us, expands the timeline, if you will. Shows us the detail of how that works. See, God's sovereignty is the principle that refers to His complete power, rule, and authority over everything. And it's a great idea, it's a great picture, but until we think about, wait a minute, but what about all the bad stuff that's happening? Is He sovereign over that? And like I said in the beginning, it's a universal human problem. We all have to wrestle with this implication, whether or not we believe in God. So I wrote down, and maybe if you want to correct me on this, you can. We can message me in the Telegram group or email me, and I'll respond with my new email signature. But we only have three options, really. One is no one's in charge. No one's in charge. There is no God, there is no transcendent, and it is all just chaos. That removes the problem of a God in charge who's behind all of these things. But it also removes any hope, any guarantee, any restoration. Even if you believe the other view of no one's in charge is a pantheon, gods are fighting. Zeus and Hera are fighting again because he was unfaithful again. And that's why there's a storm in your city, malas kayo. That's one option. No one's really in charge. The other option is two people are in charge. Dualism. Light and dark are constantly fighting. Good and evil are constantly fighting. Satan is sometimes winning and God is sometimes winning. It's Star Wars. So sometimes the light side will win and sometimes the dark side will win. And this removes from us the burden of having to wrestle with, okay, God allowed bad things. No, that wasn't God. That was just Satan. And God, and that's why we should be praying more, so God can do more good things. Parang ganon. But God's not really in charge. And again, there's also no guarantee of restoration. What the Bible teaches is different. What God has revealed in Scripture is different, that there is one in charge, and it is Him. He doesn't inflict Job's suffering. He is not the one who harms Job. It's all Satan. He is not the one doing evil, but we definitely have to acknowledge that He allows it. For a time. For a limited purpose. He does not limit Satan to the point that he does away with him completely. And maybe you've asked that question. Why did God allow this thing to happen to me? Why doesn't God just do away with it? Maybe you've asked it in different ways, right? Why doesn't God just kill every corrupt politician, whatever, you know? And where would you stop, diba? Dynasty yan. So, buong pamilya na, diba? And we can keep asking that question until you get to the place, well, why is there pain at all? Why do we experience anything but pleasure? How do we do this? How do we wrestle with this? Job's friends, chapter 2 shows up, his friends show up, and his friends are mourning with him and they're sad with him, but they have a simplistic mindset for this. To them, they're like, God blesses the good and He curses the evil. You look like you're cursed, you must be evil. And so the whole book is they're just like telling Job, you're evil, you must be evil. It starts off very tentative. In chapter 5, Eliphaz is like, you know, you've been a good guy, but maybe you've made some mistakes, right? Parang ganon. By chapter 8, Bildad is like, shut up! Parang ganon, you evil person. Can you imagine this? The friendship over talaga. You know, the book, if you've ever had friends stab you in the back at your worst moment, you would love the book of Job. So that's what they're doing. You know, and there's reducing God, and they're saying, God only blesses the good and He only curses the evil, so you must be evil. Meanwhile, Job is saying, I know I don't deserve this. I know I'm righteous. Is God making a mistake? Is He evil? And actually, if you read Job's long prayers to God, he goes back and forth. There are times when he's like, he really seems, parang he doesn't know what he's asking for. There are times when he says to God, God, deliver me. Help me. Why are you doing this to me? And when God doesn't deliver him, he says, you must be bad. You've messed up. God, he says, you like this. That's the only reason why you would let this happen to me. And then, from that mood, he goes to his friends and he goes, no, God will prove me right. Kahit mamatay ako, He will show you after I'm dead, I was not sinful. I just love that that's captured. That this guy, Job, is wrestling with these conflicting emotions he doesn't understand. In fact, Job 23:13-16, this is him wrestling with God's sovereignty. He says, I can't complain to Him. Even if I went to Him and told Him I was righteous, look what he says, but He stands alone. There's no one at His level. Who can oppose Him? He does whatever He pleases. He carries out His decree against me. Many such plans He still has in store. That is why I am terrified before Him. When I think of all this, I fear Him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. That's Job's conclusion. Eh, ano gagawin ko? Siya pa rin naman yung Diyos. Kanino ako magrereklamo? Kanino ako mag-a-appeal? Wala nang Supreme Court pa na mas supreme pa sa Kanya. Siya na yung Diyos. I remember when years ago, my wife was reading this verse and she came to me and she said, this is how I feel. After successive miscarriages, while dealing with postpartum depression and the loss of her dad, she said, this is how I feel. I feel like I can't stop God if He ever decided. Who's to stop Him? He allowed the babies in my womb to die. He allowed my father to die before I could see him. If He allowed you or one of our sons to die, could I complain? Who would I complain to? Who is God's ombudsman? Does God get impeached? Should the Almighty terrifies me? Yes. That is the beginning of the understanding of sovereignty. Because God's sovereignty means He is in complete control. We have no leverage over Him. We have no ability to control or manipulate or demand anything from Him. The only guarantee that we have is that He is good. And I know that's hard to wrestle with in the middle of pain, in the middle of suffering, in the middle of that experience. And so, I'm going to say something. No, I know we're saying that these are the resources that we have for wrestling with suffering and pain. But if this one isn't too helpful for you, go back to week 2, week 1. Next week will be better also, okay? So, but we will have to face this one eventually as well. But in the moment, you don't have to do that. I don't talk to people who are in pain and be like, well, now you know sovereignty. That's not the way you respond to someone in pain. Weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn, the Bible says. But sooner or later, we will have to wrestle with this reality. But the book of Job, while it doesn't fully explain suffering, it reveals a God who's present in it. And it shows us why God's sovereignty is actually a good thing, despite the difficult implications that it has. The first good thing about God's sovereignty is because God is sovereign, we can trust His hidden purposes. What does that mean? We know in the book of Job that there is a reason for God's purposes. Job doesn't know. All Job knows is, I've been honoring God, following God, and boom, these things happen to me one after the other. We know there's a reason. God has a reason. Job never knows the reason. But by the end of the book of Job, the whole book, he's asking for a reason, but by the end of the book, he doesn't need a reason. Here's the parts where Job's complaining about God. Look at Job 9:23-24. When he's complaining about God, let's jump down. When a scourge brings sudden death, He, God, mocks the despair of the innocent. When a land falls into the hands of the wicked, He blindfolds its judges. If it's not He, who is it? This is Job in his most sino pa bang gumagawa nito kung hindi si Lord? Di ba si Lord yan? Di ba siya yung may kaya ng lahat? Maybe you're asking that, Lord, why are you letting this happen? You're watching the impeachment trial, and you're like, this mockery of justice. Okay, fine. And Job saying, God, you look so evil from where I'm standing right now. You look like you want this to happen. And after repeated questions and charges against God like that, in Job 38, God responds to Job. Verse 1, the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. He said, who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man, I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? And God starts to answer Job, and it's and the way that the commentators describe it is that Job's poetry is the most beautiful in the book in describing human suffering. And it's the way of the author to show that his position is superior to his friend's position. His friends have a simplistic position. His superior is correct because his poetry is better, until God's poetry shows up, which is an even more artistic and creative approach in the Hebrew. And God tells Job, you're laying this charge against me. You're saying I'm evil. You're saying I like the suffering of the innocent. You're saying I love evil. Let me ask you first if you can understand things from my perspective. And then God asks Job a series of questions about the universe. And the rest of the chapters, chapter 58, 39, 40, 41, are all about those responses. Were you there when I started the stars? Are you the one who puts the constellations in their places? The clouds, the rain, the lightning. It reminds me of that famous story of that theologian that in the early church, Saint Anselm. Saint Anselm, who was contemplating on God and the mysteries of leader and these kinds of questions and God's purpose and human freedom, and he was lost about it. And while he was lost, he saw a child playing in the beach, and the child was running and taking his scoop and getting water and pouring it into the bucket, and then the bucket would fill it, and he would add more and more and more. So he asked the child, what are you doing? And the child said, I'm trying to put the ocean in my bucket. And he said to the child, the ocean would never fit in your bucket. The ocean's far. Even the ocean you can see is already beyond your ability, much more the ocean you cannot see. And then as the legend goes, the child said, it is no different than you, a man, attempting to comprehend the entire mysteries of the universe. It's too big for our ability. And this is what the Christian faith comes to. Is there someone in charge who knows what's going on? And because He is good, I don't need to know everything that's going on. Or because I don't believe that He is good, or I don't know Him, I need to know what's going on. What then is our position? Job comes to the place in chapter 42 after God's speech when Job replies to the Lord, I know you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. Job's conclusion is, I don't know, and I don't need to know. It's enough for me to know that you know. It's enough for me to know that you're in charge. Our faith offers us that when knowing God replaces the need to understand everything. When knowing and trusting that He's in charge. I don't need to want, when you're in a Grab, or no, not so much in a Grab anymore, but dati pag nagta-taxi ka, yung kinakabahan ka, ayaw matulog kasi baka ilayo ka pa, kung saan-saan pa, tapos tataasan yung metro. Of course, for women, it's totally different issue of safety. You definitely wouldn't sleep. Right? Because you don't feel safe with the person driving the car. On the other hand, when you know the person driving the car and you trust the person driving the car, you rest. You don't need to know. The person will get you there. God's sovereignty teaches us we may not understand His purposes, but we can trust they exist. That He has a reason. That God is not random, arbitrary, or capricious. Random, wala lang, it just happens. Arbitrary, ito lang, bakit? Gusto ko lang i-curse si Job. Or capricious, that it's His mood today. And some of us, we still think God's like that. We still think God's capricious. Something bad happens to you. Mamaya, paglabas mo, tatalsikan ka, Lord, what did I do? What, you think God's like that? Na-late ka sa church. Di ba? Talsikan ka ng tubig. Is God like that? Is He really like that in your mind? Eventually, we will get to where Job is. We'll know God well enough that we won't need every answer. That is what God's sovereignty shows us. I don't need to know. I know you. It hurts. It sucks. I'm gonna complain. Aaray ako ng aaray sa gitna nito. But I am trusting you will bring me out of this, Lord. Sure, game yon. Fair yun. Lahat yun sa Kanya. See, the temptation with pain, with suffering, is it can tend to shrink our world until we think that our pain is the measure of everything else. In our pain, we become the standard of right and wrong. And that's kind of where Job makes a mistake. Where Job's like, I know I'm righteous. I know I'm in pain. You're terrible, friends. And God, you're probably a terrible God. He becomes the standard. Because I know I'm right. And insisting on his own righteousness, he starts to believe he's the only one who is righteous. That God must be failing him somehow. Because that's what pain does. It can shrink our universe to only what matters immediately to us. And this is where pain and suffering can either bring us closer to God and loving to others, or make us turn inward and it's all about what I feel. In fact, that's something God takes against Job. In chapter 40, verse 8, when he's responding to Job, he says, would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? Don't you trust that I know you are righteous? Don't turn that against me, because I am the hope that you have as well. And part of God's response to him in pointing at the stars, the universe, the weather, the animals, the plants, that he's sustaining all of these things, Job realizes, I thought God was evil because of all the suffering I'm experiencing. I've forgotten all the good that He is currently in charge of. Because God is sovereign, which is the second point today, that we can trust His unseen care. He is doing a lot more. That's why I love that we sang, Great is our faithfulness. Great is His faithfulness. Yes, there's a lot that's wrong. Yes, there's a lot we can ask for, that we can work towards, and there's a lot we can't even improve ourselves. We're asking Him to fix, but we must never forget there is a lot that He is doing, that He is sustaining in our lives. There are far more tragedies. I could ask God, Lord, why did you let this happen when I was 22? This accident in my head, multiple fractures of the skull, my parents are here. Hate that this was their own Job moment, it seemed like, where they're like, God, why would you let this happen to our son? But then I also think back to just the foolishness of my teens and 20s, and buti nga isa lang. And so many other things that could have gotten worse. See, we tend to notice God's interruptions more than His constant preservation. Every breath that we have is from God. When we wake up and we can see and our minds are working and we can experience love, these are all from God. So in the same time, yes, God wants to hear your complaints. But hopefully, as we mature, we get to the place where we feel and experience and see the complaints, but we also see His faithfulness. And it's His sovereignty that's causing that. In fact, even physics, to me, is a picture of God's sovereignty. The fact that human science can only, extract so much, and then we get to a point that we're like, beyond this, we don't know anymore. But He knows. It's human nature to want to remove the mystery. And that's where we have AI. So many people, so many AI proponents, and I'll use it too. But there are people who love AI, and they're like, it will unlock, the human expectancy. We might live forever with the power of AI. All these health metrics people have to remove the mystery. But even while, sure, study, learn, all of these things, but we must never forget there will always be a limit. There will always be something beyond us. And there's nothing that's beyond Him. And it's not our knowledge, not our skill, not our ability. It's His sovereignty that's preserving you and your family today. And we can either try to make it on our own or trust that about Him. Because of His sovereignty, we trust His hidden purposes. Because of His sovereignty, we trust His unseen care. And finally, because of His sovereignty, we trust His restoring grace. Like I said, the ending of the book of Job, God restores everything to Job. Verse 12, chapter 42, the Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the former part. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. Notice how this is double. If you go back to chapter 1, this is exactly double of all that was said. So, again, don't get hung up on the exact numbers, but the point is it was more blessed than it was previously. Except for verse 13, he also had 7 sons, 3 daughters. People have theorized over and over again, why would the possessions be doubled, but the number of children would remain the same? He had 10 children before the disaster, and they died, and 10 more after. I think one reason why, I don't have a decisive, a verse for this, I think one reason why is because this captures the fact that even biblically, even back then, children are irreplaceable. They are not, having more kids doesn't replace the one you lost. The other reason why is that Job and his wife still have 10 kids. They're just with God. And there are 10 who are on earth. So there's still 20. In the same way that my wife and I are so grateful. Her niece made for us an artwork where there's a family of 4 and 3 of the children that were miscarried, observing from a distance, that we will see one day. So God doubles Job's reward, but let's not get this wrong. In the same way that Job's suffering was not punishment for his evil, because he didn't do evil, right? He didn't deserve the suffering, right? The reward is also not because he did something good. It's not, I didn't curse God, so I get my reward. No, instead they are gifts from God. In the same way, Job was right when said the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Our blessing is from God's sovereignty. And again, this can make us nervous because where's my guarantee? Wait a minute, I've been giving to the church. I've been helping people. Even there's no guarantee. You mean my business is not guaranteed to fly because of this? No, you have a better guarantee than your own good works. Your guarantee is He is good. The God who restores us is never manipulated or coerced or cornered or tricked into blessing His people. He does it because He wants to. He does it because He is good to you. Now, if we're people who are relying on our good works, that's like I've been racking up mileage points on something that wala palang reward. But if I'm someone with no mileage points, that's great news for me. Buti na lang, Lord. Because I'm not platinum anything. I'm not VIP membership anything. But you send rain and you send blessing because you are good. This is really the question we all have to wrestle with. That our pain is telling us, there's a voice that wants us to say, curse God, He is not good, He is not good. And instead we want to hold on and say, Lord, show me that you are good even despite this. Remind me. Perhaps my favorite part of God's restoration to Job is how God vindicated him to his friends. The whole book, his friends are saying, you've probably done wrong, Job. In fact, the accusations against him become way more outlandish. As they look at his suffering, they're like, you've probably stolen from widows. They make it like to be like Lex Luthor, or Harry Osborn, Green Goblin, but he's such a bad guy. But like, ano ba yan? No, starting he's such a great guy, now he's such a bad guy. 42:7, after the Lord said these things to Job, He said to Eliphaz the Temanite, I am angry with you and your two friends, because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. Mic drop. This is like Pretty Woman in the expensive boutique store, or like Anne Hathaway in Princess Diaries coming up. The moment when the bullies get their comeuppance, this is totally that. The whole time, Eliphaz and his friends have been like, we represent God. We are telling you, you evil person, what God wants. And when God speaks, God's on Job's side. And God actually tells him, I'm actually mad at you guys. This guy, yung sinisiraan nyo, this is my servant, he's on my side. Ask him for prayer, and then I'll forgive you. What's going on here? And we gotta stop and ask, what did God say He was mad at them about? You have not spoken the truth about me. But didn't Job say bad things about God as well? What's the difference? Why would Job get vindicated? He had his time with God where he repented. Yes, but what's the difference? And I think the difference is, even in accusing God, even in complaining to God, even in calling God evil, Job is still pursuing Him. He wants that time with God. He says over and over again, I wish I knew where his house was. And I would shout at him and say, let's talk about this. It reminds me of Forrest Gump. If you've seen that movie, there's his army lieutenant, Lieutenant Dan, the guy who loses his legs. And the whole time, Lieutenant Dan hates God. He's like, and the whole time, Forrest Gump is just like, this dumb, positive person. Well, God might have a plan. He's this super upbeat person, and Lieutenant Dan just hates Forrest for having this upbeat attitude. Where he's like, why would God let you save me and my legs to be blown away? And we don't know what happens, but in the middle of their shrimp boat expedition, Lieutenant Dan is up on the rigging in the middle of a storm with the lightning, and he's screaming at God, come on, kill me. You took my legs, take the rest of me, blah, 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 blah. And we don't know what happens. All Forrest says is, he made his peace with God that day. And I think that's what Job was doing. And I think from the book of Job, God honors that. He prefers that to the arrogant, smug certainty of the friends. They keep speaking for God, but they never speak to Him. See, Job's biggest error was he was demanding an explanation. But his friend's biggest error was thinking they already had one. I know this. I know this. See, the problem of human suffering should cause us to slow down. That's what the book of Job is showing. It's not as simple as someone suffering. Well, what did you expect? But slow down. Feel your pain. Feel their pain. Cry out to God about their pain. Job's egotism is the egotism of pain, but theirs is the arrogance of certainty. And in the end, God corrects Job, but He condemns their friends. Really, for all of us, should be a comfort. God's showing us that Job's fluctuating faith, this mood, is actually closer to God's reality, to God's will, than his friends' unwavering and judgmental certainty. The friends were defending a wrong theology, but Job just pursued God. And in the end, God vindicated the one who wrestled honestly with him over those who claimed to have him figured out. I think that's what God's sovereignty is teaching us. Resist these automatic, knee-jerk reactions. God must be bad. No, God is good all the time. Forget it. No, God, feel it. Trust Him. God's looking for people who will not, He's not looking for people who will have every answer. He's looking for people who will not let go of Him until the questions are over. That's what His sovereignty is teaching us. Are you enduring something right now? Have you been enduring it for a long time? The book of Job teaches us that God welcomes honest wrestling, and we can trust Him to restore that. This is why God's sovereignty is ultimately a gift. God's sovereignty means He knows what I don't know. It means He's doing what I cannot see. And it means He will give what I could never earn for myself. Now all of this, as we end, hinges on one thing. He is good. And what if He's not good? How do I know if He is good? What's my guarantee? I want the guarantee. I'm just supposed to take your word for it? Like I took other people's words for it? No, we already have a guarantee. The guarantee is that God demonstrates His own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. The book of Job shows us He is sovereign, but the cross shows us that He is good. I don't deserve it. And so what we're banking on is not, I earned this, Lord. Are you going to know? Lord, you gave yourself to me. And as Romans 8 says, if He did not spare His own Son for us, how much more will He not also along with Him graciously give us all things? So we end this service, we're going to take communion. You're welcome to participate if you want. When you take communion, you are confessing that God gave His Son, and His Son gave His body and His blood for us. That's your guarantee. That whatever suffering you are going through now has meaning, has purpose, and will be restored because He is good. Let's pray.